You know, there's a specific sound a NASCAR engine makes when it's truly angry. It's not just loud, it's a tearing sound, like the air itself is being ripped apart by 8 pistons moving so fast they're blurring the lines of physics. But in 1988, that sound changed. It got strangled. It got softer. And for the guys in the garage, the ones with grease permanently etched into their fingerprints and caffeine running through their veins, that silence was deafening. It was the sound of authority clamping down on innovation. It was the sound of the restrictor plate. But here's the thing. While most teams were complaining to the press or trying to tweak their aerodynamics to gain 1/10 of a second, one anonymous, brilliant, and arguably crazy mechanic was staring at a pile of bolts and seeing a doorway to a different dimension, a dimension where the rules didn't apply. This is legacy motoring, and I spend way too much time thinking about the gray areas of automotive history, where the rulebook ends and the real engineering begins. If you're someone who believes that racing is won in the machine shop just as much as it is on the track, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Because today, we aren't just talking about a car part, we are talking about the greatest magic trick in the history of combustion. Let's rewind. You have to understand the atmosphere. The year is 1988. The place is Daytona. The mood is hostile. See, NASCAR had just dropped a bombshell on the garage area. After Bill Elliott tore a hole through the atmosphere at Talladega going 212 miles per hour, and Bobby Allison's car went airborne and nearly took out the catch fence, the powers that be decided enough was enough. They were scared, legitimately scared. They thought someone was going to die, or worse, a car was going to land in the grandstands. So they introduced the restrictor plate. Now, you might be thinking, okay, safety first, right? What's the big deal? Well, look, imagine you're an Olympic sprinter. You've trained your whole life to run the 100-meter dash. You've optimized your diet, your shoes, your stride, and then right before the gun goes off, the officials hand you a straw and say, you have to breathe through this while you run. That's what a restrictor plate is. It's a square of aluminum with 4 holes drilled in it placed between the carburetor and the intake manifold. It choked the life out of these massive 358 cubic inch V8s. We're talking about taking an engine capable of 700, maybe 750 horsepower and suffocating it down to 450. For a race car engineer, this is offensive. It's not just a rule change, it's a personal insult to your craft. You spend thousands of hours porting heads, polishing valves, balancing crankshafts to the gram, all to maximize airflow. And then NASCAR bolts a literal wall in the middle of your intake tract. The garage was furious. Drivers were bored. They were running in giant packs, unable to pull away, stuck in a giant traffic jam at 190 miles per hour. It was safe, sure, but it wasn't racing, at least not the kind of racing these guys respected. But this is where it gets really interesting. In every garage, there are 2 types of mechanics. There's the guy who reads the rule book and says, okay, this is what we can't do. And then there's the guy who reads the rule book and asks, what did they forget to say? The rulebook in 1988 was thick, but it wasn't the encyclopedic legal document it is today. It specified the size of the carburetor. It specified the size of the plate. It specified the gasket thickness. It was obsessed with the plate. The inspectors were obsessed with the plate. They had these go, no-go gauges, precision metal pucks they would try to shove through the holes. If the gauge fit, you were illegal. If it didn't, you were good. They measured the flatness. They measured the mounting surface. They were looking at that square of aluminum like it was the crown jewels. But here's what most people don't realize about human psychology, especially when it comes to inspections. When you focus everyone's attention on one specific object, the magician's left hand, or in this case, the restrictor plate, you become blind to everything else. You stop seeing the context. You stop seeing the environment. You stop seeing the fasteners. Our anonymous hero, let's call him the machinist for the sake of this story, was likely staring at an engine on a dyno late one night. The dyno moam is a special place. It's loud, it smells like race fuel and exhaust, and it's where the truth lives. The numbers on the screen were depressing. 450 horsepower. The curve was flat. The engine was gasping for air. The vacuum readings below the carburetor were huge because the pistons were trying to suck in air that the plate wouldn't let through. He's looking at the carburetor setup. You've got the carb on top, then a gasket, then the restrictor plate, then another gasket, then the intake manifold. Holding it all together are 4 studs or bolts, standard, industrial-grade steel fasteners. They go through the base of the carburetor, pass right through the 4 corners of the restrictor plate area, and thread into the manifold. And that's when the lightning struck. Think about the geography of that intake for a second. Those 4 bolts, they're literally standing inside the airstream. They are obstacles. Usually in a high-performance engine, you want everything out of the way of the air. You want a smooth path. But because of the design, those bolts have to be there to hold the carb down. They are occupying prime real estate, right in the throat of the beast. The machinist probably picked up one of those bolts. Standard 5/16 inch diameter, heavy, solid steel. He probably twirled it in his fingers. The rulebook said the restrictor plate holes had to be a specific size. It said the carburetor venturis had to be a specific size. But did the rulebook say the bolts had to be solid? I want you to really visualize this moment. It's 3 a.m. The coffee is cold, the shop is quiet except for the hum of a refrigerator, and this guy is holding a bolt and realizing he's holding 20 horsepower in the palm of his hand. It sounds insane, right? How can a bolt be horsepower? The logic was beautifully, dangerously simple. If the bolt is solid, it's just a fastener. It's dead weight. But if the bolt is hollow, if you could drill a hole through the center of it lengthwise, suddenly that bolt isn't an obstacle anymore. It's a straw. It's a bypass tunnel. It's a secret passage that lets air skip the line, go right around that hated restrictor plate, and dump straight into the intake manifold where the engine is starving for it. Now, you might be thinking, wait, a tiny hole in a bolt? How much air can that possibly flow? And look, I get it. We're talking about a hole maybe 3/16 of an inch wide. It seems negligible. It seems like trying to drain a swimming pool with a syringe. But you have to understand the physics of a restricted engine. When an engine is restricted, the vacuum inside the intake manifold is massive. It is desperate for air. The pressure differential between the outside air and the inside of the manifold is huge. That means any opening, no matter how small, is going to flow air at incredibly high velocity. It's like a hull breach on a spaceship. The air doesn't just drift in, it screams in. So the machinist walks over to the lathe. This is where the artistry starts. You can't just take a hand drill to a hardened steel bolt. These things have to withstand vibration, heat, and torque. If a bolt snaps and falls into the engine at 9,000 RPM, you don't just lose the race, you destroy a $40,000 engine. The precision required was surgical. He chucks the bolt into the lathe. He centers it perfectly. He starts drilling from the bottom, the threaded end. The drill bit bites into the steel, curling out little metal shavings. He goes up, up, up through the shaft of the bolt. But here's the critical part. He has to stop before he hits the head of the bolt. From the top, looking down at the carburetor, the bolt has to look 100% factory stock. If an inspector looks at the engine bay, he sees a standard bolt head with the grade markings and everything. The secret has to be invisible from above. But simply drilling a blind hole from the bottom doesn't help, right? Air needs an entrance and an exit. So he drills the center out, creating a tube. Then he has to create the entry points. This is where it gets really clever. He drills cross holes into the side of the bolt, up near the top, right where the bolt sits inside the air cleaner area or the spacer. These little holes allow air to enter the hollow shaft, travel down the length of the bolt, bypassing the restrictor plate entirely, and dump out the bottom into the manifold. Suddenly, you don't have 4 bolts. You have 4 auxiliary carburetor barrels. You have 4 secret induction systems disguised as fasteners. You've just created 4 secret tunnels for air to escape into the engine. But wait, you're not done yet. Mechanics are paranoid people. They know that if something looks too good to be true, it usually fails in the most spectacular way possible. So the machinist couldn't just stop at drilling the bolts. He had to engineer the entire ecosystem around them. See, a hollow bolt is useless if the air can't get into the hole. If you just screw a hollow bolt into a tight hole, you've effectively capped it off. So the conspiracy had to expand. It wasn't just the bolts, it was the spacer. The carburetor spacer is this block of aluminum that sits under the carb. The team started modifying these spacers with microscopic precision. They would machine tiny little channels or plenums around the bolt holes. To the naked eye, it just looked like a relief cut for fitment, but in reality, it was an intake funnel. It was designed to guide that high-velocity air right into the side entry holes of the bolts. It was a complete systems engineering approach to cheating. And I use the word cheating affectionately here because the level of thought required to pull this off is honestly higher than the level of thought required to write the rule it was breaking. Now, let's talk numbers, because this is where the skeptics usually chime in. You might be thinking, okay, legacy motoring guy, you're hyping this up, but how much power are we really talking about? 5 horsepower? Maybe 10? Here's what you have to understand about plate racing. At Daytona or Talladega, the cars are pushing a wall of air. The drag is immense, and because of the restrictor plate, everyone has roughly the same horsepower. It's socialist racing. Everyone gets the same ration. So if everyone has 450 horsepower and you show up with 455, you have an advantage. If you show up with 465, you are a god. Engineers who have analyzed these setups years later, running the math on flow benches, estimate that a well-executed set of hollow bolts could flow an extra 40 to 50 cubic feet of air per minute, CFM. Let me put that in perspective for you. 50 CFM is roughly the amount of air required to inflate a standard car tire in about 2 seconds. Imagine that volume of air every single minute, bypassing the restrictor plate and feeding your starving cylinders. In terms of power, dyno tests suggested it was worth anywhere from 15 to 25 horsepower. In any other form of racing, 25 horsepower is a nice bump. In restrictor plate racing, 25 horsepower is a nuclear weapon. It's the difference between being a sitting duck in the middle of the pack, helpless as the draft shuffles you back, and being the car that can pull out of line and pass without help. It meant you could run a little more downforce for stability and still keep up on the straights. It gave the driver options, and at 200 miles per hour, options are everything. So the car rolls into the technical inspection line. This is the moment of truth. The inspectors are swarming. They've got their clipboards, their templates, their gauges. They pop the hood. They pull the carburetor off. They take the restrictor plate and check it against the light. They measure the holes with micrometer precision. And right there, sitting in the intake manifold, are the 4 bolts. The inspector probably puts his hand on them to steady himself while he leans in. He is literally touching the illegal parts, but he doesn't see them. Why? Because a bolt is the most boring part of a car. It's background noise. It's like the font on a menu. You read the words, you don't look at the letters. The brain filters it out. The genius of the hollow bolt wasn't just the airflow, it was the psychological camouflage. Unless you physically removed the bolt, held it up to the light, and looked through it like a telescope, you would never know. And why would an inspector remove a mounting bolt during a routine pre-race check? It would be a waste of time. They were hunting for big game, oversized pistons, illegal fuel additives, hidden nitrous bottles. They weren't looking for a slightly lighter fastener. This went on for years. Think about that. We aren't talking about a one-race wonder. We're talking about a sustained period, from roughly 1988 to 1991, where the grid was likely split into 2 groups, the haves and the have-nots. The guys who knew about the bolts, and the guys who were scratching their heads wondering why their engines felt so sluggish compared to the leaders. This brings up a fascinating aspect of garage culture: tribal knowledge. Secrets in racing have a half-life. They decay. It starts with one mechanic. Then he needs the machinist to drill them. Now 2 people know. Then the crew chief notices the dyno numbers don't match the math. He figures it out. Now 3 people know. Then that mechanic moves to another team for a $500 raise. Now 2 teams know. It spreads like a virus. Crew chiefs would see a competitor's car in the garage area, maybe with the carb off for maintenance. They'd walk by, casually, pretending to drink a Coke. They'd glance at the spacer. Is that a relief cut? Why is that bolt head marked differently? They wouldn't say anything. They'd just go back to their own truck and tell their guys, drill the bolts. It became an open secret among the elite, but a total mystery to the officials. It was mutually assured destruction. If I rat you out, you rat me out, and we both get disqualified. So, nobody talked. The garage became a fraternity of silence. They were all in on the joke, and NASCAR was the punchline. But here is where the engineering gets even wilder. As more teams figured it out, the designs evolved. It wasn't just street holes anymore. The really smart teams started applying fluid dynamics to the inside of the bolts. They realized that a straight hole is good, but a tapered hole is better. If you shape the inside of the bolt like a venturi, wider at the top, narrowing down, then expanding again, you can actually accelerate the air. You can create a low pressure zone that sucks even more air in. Some rumors, and I love these unverified garage legends, claim that a few teams even tried rifling the inside of the bolts, like a gun barrel. They machined spiral grooves inside that tiny 3/16-inch channel. The theory was that it would spin the air, creating a vortex that stabilized the flow and mixed the fuel better as it entered the manifold. Think about the absurdity of this. You have teams spending tens of thousands of dollars on research and development, not on the engine block, not on the suspension, but on the bolts. They were treating fasteners like they were Formula One aerodynamic components. They were using aerospace-grade alloys, titanium, maraging steel, so they could make the walls of the bolt thinner and thinner without them snapping. Every thousandth of an inch of wall thickness removed was more air. It was an arms race fought in millimeters. But as with all golden ages of piracy, it had to end. You can only fool the sheriff for so long before he notices that your horse is suspiciously fast. The downfall of the hollow Bolt Bandits didn't come from a brilliant investigation. It didn't come from a new high-tech scanning tool. It came from the oldest weakness in human history: a disgruntled employee. The story goes, and like all great racing myths, the details vary depending on who you ask and how many beers they've had, that in 1991, a mechanic from one of the top teams got fired. Maybe he messed up a pit stop. Maybe he just didn't get along with the crew chief. Whatever the reason, he was out of a job and he was angry. And he didn't just leave with his toolbox. He left with a souvenir. He walked straight into the NASCAR hauler, slammed the bolt down on the official's desk, and said, "Cut it open." Can you imagine being the inspector in that moment? You've spent 3 years chasing ghosts. You've been measuring plate holes down to the micron. You've been tearing engines apart. And suddenly, the answer is sitting right there on your desk, looking like a piece of hardware junk. They took the bolt to the back. They put it in a vise. They took a hacksaw to it. And as the blade cut through the steel, the deception was laid bare. The hollow center, the cross-drilled entry holes, the sheer elegance of it. It must have been a mix of fury and admiration. They had been played. Badly. The reaction from NASCAR was swift and nuclear. This wasn't a warning. This was a complete lockdown. They issued a new directive immediately. No more team-supplied bolts. From now on, NASCAR would provide the bolts. And they didn't just hand out random bolts. They instituted a custody chain that would make the CIA proud. Before qualifying and before the race, officials would walk down the grid with a specialized box. They would hand 4 specific bolts to each crew chief. These bolts were marked. They had unique head stampings, sometimes even serial numbers. The teams had to install these bolts while the official watched, and after the race, you had to give them back. If you lost a bolt, you were in trouble. If the bolt looked tampered with, you were disqualified. It seemed like checkmate. Game over. The loophole was closed. But here's the thing about racers. You tell them they can't go through the front door, and they don't stop trying to get in the house. They just start looking for loose windows, or they start digging a tunnel, or they try to blow up the wall. The official Bolt era didn't stop the cheating. It just made the cheating more creative. And this is where the story shifts from clever engineering to mission impossible levels of subterfuge. teams started experimenting with ways to defeat the official bolts. One legend, and again unproven but widely whispered, involves dissolvable cores. The idea was to take a bolt that looked solid, but had a core made of a material that would melt or disintegrate at high heat. So it passes inspection when it's cold. The official hands it to you, you install it, the engine fires up, the heat builds, and slowly over the first 50 laps, the core melts away, opening up a passage. Did it work? Probably not reliably. It's a huge risk. If the core melts too fast, the bolt loses structural integrity and snaps. If it doesn't melt enough, you get no benefit. But the fact that they even thought about it shows you the desperation. Another tactic was the switcheroo. This required sleight of hand that would make a Las Vegas magician blush. The official hands you the 4 marked bolts. The mechanic takes them, he turns his back to grab a wrench. In that split second, he swaps the official bolts for 4 identical-looking replicas that are hollowed out. He installs the fakes, he keeps the real ones in his pocket. After the race, during the cool-down lap, or amidst the chaos of victory lane, he has to swap them back. Imagine the pressure. You're celebrating a Daytona 500 win, cameras everywhere, officials everywhere, and you have to secretly unscrew 4 bolts and replace them before the tech inspector gets to the car. It's insane, it's risky, and frankly, it became too dangerous. The penalties for getting caught were escalating. Suspensions, massive fines, loss of championship points. Eventually, the hollow bolt died. Not because the idea wasn't sound, but because the surveillance state of NASCAR became too oppressive. The cost of getting caught finally outweighed the benefit of the extra horsepower. But the legacy of the hollow bolt isn't just about a few seasons of faster cars. It fundamentally changed the relationship between the sport and its competitors. It created a culture of paranoia that exists to this day. Before the hollow bolt, the rulebook was a set of guidelines. Don't make the engine bigger than this. Don't use rocket fuel. After the hollow bolt, the rulebook became a technical manual of constraints. NASCAR realized they couldn't just say what not to do, they had to specify exactly what you must do. Bolts must be solid steel, grade 8, obtained from this specific vendor with this specific part number. This shift in philosophy is huge. It moved the sport from innovation by subtraction, taking away material to go faster, to spec racing. It was the beginning of the box we live in now, where so many parts are standardized that the mechanics have less and less room to work their magic. And honestly, that's kind of sad. Because when you look at a hollow bolt, you aren't just looking at a cheat. You're looking at human ingenuity. You are looking at a problem, a restrictive, arbitrary rule, and a solution that used simple physics to overcome it. It didn't require millions of dollars in wind tunnel time. It didn't require a supercomputer. It required a lathe, a drill bit, and a brain that refused to accept no as an answer. In a modern world where racing teams have armies of data scientists and simulation engineers, the hollow bolt feels refreshingly analog. It feels punk rock. It was a middle finger to authority delivered through a fastener. But the story doesn't end in 1991. The spirit of the hollow bolt lives on. It just moved underground. Or rather, it moved into the software. Today, you can't drill a hole in a bolt. The inspectors have ultrasound machines. They can see inside the metal, but they can't always see inside the code. Modern cheating, or creative interpretation, has moved to the ECU, Engine Control Unit. It's about traction control systems that hide inside the fuel mapping. It's about alternator loads that change based on whether the car is qualifying or racing to save drag on the engine. It's about suspension components that are rigid when the car is stationary for inspection, but flex and collapse at speed to drop the car lower to the track for better aerodynamics. The hollow bolt of 2024 isn't a piece of hardware. It's a line of code. It's a specialized hydraulic valve. It's a laser-centered part with internal lattice structures that collapse under specific loads. The game is the same. The tools have just changed. And that's why this story matters. It's not a history lesson about a fastener. It's a lesson about the nature of competition. As long as there is a rule book, there will be someone reading it with a magnifying glass, looking for the white space between the lines. As long as there is a prize for winning, there will be someone willing to risk everything to grab it. The anonymous mechanic who drilled that first bolt. He's probably retired now. Maybe he's sitting on a porch somewhere in North Carolina watching the race on Sunday. He sees the cars locked in a pack, restricted by tapered spacers, the modern version of the plate. And I bet he smiles, because he knows something the rest of us only suspect. He knows that right now, in some high-tech shop, a young engineer is staring at a part, maybe a sensor, maybe a bracket, maybe a piece of bodywork, and thinking, I wonder if I can make that do something it's not supposed to do. He knows the game never stops. But here is where the engineering rabbit hole goes even deeper. We talked about the volume of air, that 50 CFM number, but we haven't talked about the quality of the air. And in an internal combustion engine, quality matters just as much as quantity. See, a restrictor plate is a chaotic device. It sits there, 4 tiny holes in a flat plate smashing the airflow. It creates turbulence, but it's the wrong kind of turbulence. It creates dead zones under the plate where fuel can puddle or separate from the air. This leads to what engineers call poor mixture distribution. Cylinder 1 might run lean, hot, while cylinder 7 runs rich, wet. You can't tune the engine perfectly because you're always compromising. You're tuning for the worst cylinder. The hollow bolts fix this by accident. Think about where those bolts are located. They're positioned centrally, usually in a square pattern right in the middle of the airflow path. When you shoot a high-velocity jet of air through those bolts, it acts like a mixer. It's like turning on a blender inside the intake manifold. That fast-moving stream of air exiting the bottom of the bolt hits the slow, chaotic air coming through the restrictor plate, and it shatters the fuel droplets. It atomizes the fuel better. Better atomization means a faster burn. A faster burn means more pressure on the piston. More pressure means more torque. So the teams weren't just getting free air, they were getting a combustion efficiency upgrade that they hadn't even planned for. It was the engineering equivalent of finding a $20 bill on the street, bending down to pick it up, and realizing you're standing on a gold mine. Now let's talk about the decoy strategy, because this is my favorite part of the mental game played in the garage. As the rumors of hollow bolts started to spread, the crew chiefs knew the inspectors were getting suspicious. They could feel the heat. So what do you do when the cops are looking for a dead body in your trunk? You speed so they pull you over for a broken taillight. Teams started intentionally leaving obvious but minor infractions on the car. Maybe they'd leave the rear spoiler angle a quarter of an inch too steep. Maybe they'd leave a fuel line slightly too large. Why? Because inspectors are human. They have a job to do. They need to find something to justify their existence. If an inspector spends 20 minutes looking at a car and finds nothing, he gets paranoid. He starts digging deeper. He starts looking at bolts. But if he walks up to the car and immediately sees a spoiler violation, he gets a dopamine hit. Aha! I caught you. He writes up the violation, feels good about himself, yells at the crew chief, and moves on. The crew chief apologizes, fixes the spoiler, which didn't matter anyway, and keeps the hollow bolts installed. It was a magician's force. Look here at this illegal spoiler so you don't look there at the intake manifold. They were sacrificing pawns to save the queen. This era also highlighted the sheer economic disparity of the cheat. Let's look at the ROI, return on investment. In 1989, to get 20 horsepower legally, you would need to redesign your cylinder heads. You'd need hours on the flow bench. You'd need to cast new prototypes. You'd need to test them on the dyno. You'd probably blow a few engines up in the process. We are talking about an investment of maybe $50,000 to $100,000 in 1980s money. That's huge. The hollow bolt project? A few hours on a lathe, a few bucks for high-grade steel. The cost was negligible, maybe $500 in labor and materials. The cost per horsepower for the hollow bolt was practically zero. It was the most efficient performance upgrade in the history of the sport, and that is why it was so addictive. It democratized speed for the teams that had the knowledge, regardless of their budget. You didn't need a $1 million facility. You just needed a guy who knew how to run a drill press and keep his mouth shut. But we have to address the "what about the others" question. Because the hollow bolt wasn't the only idea people had, it was just the best one. There were other attempts to bypass the plate that failed miserably, and looking at those failures helps us appreciate the elegance of the bolt. For example, there was the flexing manifold theory. Some teams tried to cast intake manifolds with thinner walls on the bottom. The idea was that under the high vacuum of the engine, the floor of the manifold would suck upwards, or the gasket would compress, creating a gap that let air sneak in from the valley of the engine block. The problem, it was a tuning nightmare. If you suck in air from the engine valley, you're sucking in hot, oily air. It's not fresh oxygen, it's crankcase vapor. It messes up your mixture. Plus, if the manifold cracks, you're done. It was too complex, too fragile, and too messy. Then there was the collapsible lifter trick. This involved hydraulic lifters that would bleed down at high RPM, changing the valve duration to optimize for the restricted airflow. Again, brilliant in theory, but erratic in practice. If one lifter bled down faster than the others, you dropped the cylinder. The hollow bolt had none of these downsides. It didn't move. It didn't have moving parts. It didn't rely on heat or pressure to activate. It was static. It was reliable. It was, in engineering terms, a passive system. And passive systems are almost always superior to active systems when reliability is the goal. This brings us to a concept called design freeze. In engineering, you reach a point where a design is so good, so optimized, that you stop iterating. The hollow bolt reached design freeze almost immediately. Once they figured out the wall thickness and the entry holes, there was nowhere left to go. It was perfect. Compare that to the modern era of NASCAR. Today, teams are spending millions on CFD, computational fluid dynamics, to gain counts of downforce. A count is a tiny, tiny unit of measurement. They are chasing gains so small that you can't even feel them in the car. You can only see them on a stopwatch. The hollow bolt era was the last time you could find chunks of speed. It was the last time you could bolt on a part and feel the car surge forward. It was the end of the big gain era and the beginning of the marginal gain era. And I think that's why we are so fascinated by it. We look at modern F1 or modern NASCAR, and the engineering is so opaque. It's all hidden in software and carbon fiber layups. It's invisible. The hollow bolt is visceral. It's metal. You can hold it. You can understand it. If I handed you a hollow bolt right now, you would instantly understand how it works. There's no code to decipher. It's tangible. There's also a tragic element to this story that often gets overlooked: the brain drain. Think about the minds that conceived this. These were brilliant mechanical engineers. They understood fluid dynamics, metallurgy, and systems integration. And instead of using that brain power to make the car safer or more fuel efficient or more durable, they were forced to focus all that genius on bypassing a rule. NASCAR created a sandbox where the smartest kids were forced to build castles out of loopholes instead of stone. It's a classic example of perverse incentives. By making the rules so strict, NASCAR didn't stop innovation, they just directed it into the shadows. They weaponized the creativity of the garage against their own inspectors. Imagine if those same engineers had been incentivized differently. Here's a gallon of fuel. Whoever goes the fastest wins. You would have seen incredible innovations in efficiency. But instead, the rule was, here is a restrictor plate. Deal with it. So the innovation became about cheating the plate. It's a lesson for rule makers everywhere, whether in sports, business, or government. If you create a constraint that feels artificial or unfair, people won't respect it. They will circumvent it. And they will feel like heroes while doing it. The era of the hollow bolt may have ended in the early 90s, but the vacuum it left behind, both in the intake manifold and in the culture of the sport, was massive. When the crackdown happened, when the officials started handing out those serialized, solid bolts like they were communion wafers, the immediate effect was undeniable. The cars slowed down. The pack got tighter. The drivers got crankier. It was the ultimate validation. For years, some clean teams had suspected that the top guys were just better at building engines. They thought maybe their own dyno was broken or their engine builder was incompetent. But when everyone was forced onto the same, truly solid fasteners, the field leveled out. The magic horsepower evaporated overnight. It proved once and for all that the advantage wasn't in the block or the heads, it was in the invisible spaces of the hardware. But here is where the story gets really interesting and a little bit ironic. If you look at a modern NASCAR engine today, especially the ones used at superspeedways, they don't use a flat restrictor plate anymore. They use something called a tapered spacer. Now, what is a tapered spacer? It's a block of aluminum with 4 holes in it, but instead of straight cut holes that choke the air, the holes are machined with a smooth funnel-like taper. This design uses the Venturi effect to accelerate the air and allow the engine to breathe more efficiently while still limiting total power. Does that sound familiar? It should, because it is essentially the exact same principle that the hollow Bolt Bandits were using inside their illegal fasteners 35 years ago. They were creating a Venturi effect to smooth out the airflow. NASCAR eventually realized that the flat plate was terrible engineering. It caused turbulence and poor throttle response, so they adopted the tapered spacer to make the racing better. In a way, the cheaters won. Their engineering philosophy, that airflow should be managed, not just choked, eventually became the standard. They were just 3 decades ahead of the rulebook. It's the classic case of the outlaw paving the way for the law. The rum runners of the 1920s gave us the suspension technology for stock car racing. The hollow Bolt Bandits gave us the understanding of intake restrictor dynamics. History is funny like that. As we close the book on this chapter of automotive subterfuge, I want you to think about the anonymous mechanic one last time. We don't know his name, we don't know if he's still alive, but in my head, I see him clearly. He's the guy standing in the back of the shop, wiping his hands on a rag, watching the young guys panic over a laptop because the fuel map is off by 0.5%. He represents a time when you could touch the speed, when you could hold the unfair advantage in your pocket. Today, the sport is cleaner. It's more professional. The cars are safer. The inspection process is a technological marvel involving laser grids and 3D scanning arms that can detect a variance the width of a human hair. You can't drill a bolt anymore. You can't hide a nitrous bottle in the frame rail. The Wild West is gone, paved over by corporate efficiency and data analysis. But has the spirit changed? Absolutely not. Right now, as I speak, there is a team of engineers looking at the laser inspection grid and asking, okay, the laser scans the car, but what if the car moves after the scan? They are looking at the new next-gen car with its composite body and independent suspension, and they aren't seeing a spec racer. They are seeing a puzzle. They are seeing a lock that needs picking. They are the spiritual successors to the hollow Bolt Bandits. They just wear polo shirts instead of greasy coveralls. The hollow bolt reminds us that innovation often happens in the margins. We tend to focus on the big things, the engine displacement, the tire compound, the aerodynamics package, but championships are often decided by the small things, the fasteners, the spacers, the things we overlook. It teaches us that when you are faced with an impossible constraint, like breathing through a straw while running a marathon, you have 2 choices. You can accept it and lose, or you can find a way to poke a hole in the straw. The hollow bolt was more than a cheat. It was a masterpiece of minimalist engineering. It added nothing to the car. It weighed less than the stock part. It cost almost nothing. And yet, it delivered the holy grail of racing: free speed. It is the perfect example of addition by subtraction. By removing the center of the bolt, they added the one thing money couldn't buy. So, the next time you are working on your own project car, or even just dealing with a problem at work where the rules seem rigged against you, remember the hollow bolt. Remember that sometimes the answer isn't to work harder or spend more money. Sometimes the answer is to look at the things everyone else is ignoring, the bolts, the brackets, the boring stuff, and ask yourself, what if I drill the hole right here? Maybe you won't find 25 horsepower, but you might find a perspective that changes everything. Legacy motoring is about these stories. It's about the gray areas. It's about the people who refuse to lift off the throttle just because the rulebook said slow down. I want to hear from you guys. I know some of you have worked in racing or in shops where creative engineering was part of the job description. What is the most ingenious, low-tech fix or modification you've ever seen? I'm not talking about computer hacks. I'm talking about hardware. Washers use the spacers, springs heated up to change their rate. The stuff you can't see on a spec sheet. Drop a comment below. The best stories are usually the ones that were never supposed to be told, and I read every single one of them. And listen, if you enjoyed this deep dive into the mechanical underworld of NASCAR, do me a favor. Click that like button. It tells the YouTube algorithm that real automotive history matters. And if you haven't subscribed yet, fix that right now. We have files on Smokey Unic, the Toyota Celica Turbo Cheat, and the Tyrrell P34 six-wheeler coming up soon, and you do not want to miss those. Until next time, keep your bolts tight, your intake manifolds clean, and always check your wall thickness. This is Legacy Motoring, signing off.